And welcome to the Cedar Falls Committee of the Whole meeting this June 17, 2019. I'll now call this meeting to order. We have a few items on the agenda for this evening. One is sustainability, the second is a cash management report, and third is bills and payroll. First up is sustainability. I'd like to invite the Honorable Senator Eric Giddens to the microphone and have your presentation ready there.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, and members of the public. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to come and speak to you today. I am Eric Giddens. I'm a program manager at the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at UNI, and I am also now the state senator for Senate District 30. That doesn't have anything to do with what we're here to talk about today, but it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity and also appreciate you being flexible with my schedule. I was scheduled to come a couple of months ago and then had the special election and had to delay that, so thank you for working with me on that. So I just want to share with you some work that we've done at the CEEE, we call it Center for Energy and Environmental Education at UNI, related to greenhouse gas emissions inventories and some planning process that can be done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'd like to share with you the rationale behind why we do what we do, how the program works, and then some of the data that we've generated in this initial inventory that we've done. So this may be difficult to see from folks in the audience, but it's a graph I just wanted to talk about briefly, just to kind of lay the foundation for why this is important. Why do we need greenhouse gas emissions inventories and what are called community energy or climate action plans? That chart that's shown there is a historical chart of greenhouse gas emissions over hundreds of thousands of years. So greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, and a few other gases that essentially trap heat and hold it in our atmosphere. So we've had this natural cycle over hundreds of thousands of years. It's gone up and down, but in recent years, particularly the last 50 years or so, we've seen a dramatic spike in those emissions into the atmosphere. The levels have grown dramatically, and we've also seen a corresponding rise in global average temperatures. So this is an issue that all of us need to be dealing with at every level to address it, including at the local level, to reduce emissions. That's the basis for this thing. Climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. We've seen rising global temperatures, and we know that the rise in greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere and rise in temperature is very disruptive to the atmosphere. We've seen severe weather that has risen. We have data, even including data from our Regents universities here, Iowa and Iowa State, about all the adverse weather that's associated with climate change, including flooding that we experience here, wildfires in the West, more intense and dramatic hurricanes in the Gulf, all of these things. So it's incumbent upon all of us to come together and deal with this issue and with the causes of it in ways that we can, so that collectively we can provide a better future for our children and grandchildren. So we need to reduce emissions. That's the bottom line. Community energy or climate action plans, you'll hear them referred to both ways, are composed of reduction strategies over which local governments have some degree of control. So that's why I'm here talking to you today. You're a city government, and this is a process that works for city governments. Explain to you how we do the program. So the CEEE has joined. We've been members now for a couple of years of an organization called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, which is typically referred to by its acronym ICLEI. We are regional affiliate members of that organization, which allows us to provide the resources and services that that organization has to any local government in the state of Iowa through our membership. So it's actually an organization that cities themselves typically join, but we set up a unique arrangement with them. They like the idea of us providing these services for local governments through our membership, so that's what we've done. ICLEI is the organization that developed the standard protocol for doing greenhouse gas emissions accounting at the local level, so that any local government across the country that does this type of analysis is doing it the same way. And then when they start to develop plans for reducing emissions, that's also done according to a standard protocol, so everybody's kind of following the same rule book here. ClearPath is a software package that helps us with greenhouse gas emissions inventory development and then climate action planning. So we have access to that software, and again, any government can use that as long as they're working with us and through that membership. The other key thing I want to mention for us at UNI is that we're all about students, giving students great experience in communities, working with real entities in communities like you. So this, what we call UNI Conservation Corps, is the student engagement piece of the programming at our center. So through student fellowships or internships and through class projects where we work with faculty on campus, we get students engaged in these types of projects to provide meaningful services to communities, but also to give our students, our Iowa students, really great experience that they can take back to their communities and help build better futures in their communities wherever they come from. So it's an important ingredient for us as well. So the process, briefly, just to tell you how this works. There's a four-step process. First step is to develop an emissions inventory. So we first have to know what we're dealing with. We need to inventory where emissions are coming from in a community. In order to be able to reduce them, you got to know where they're coming from. You have to measure it and establish a baseline. So that's actually the work that I want to share with you later, is the initial baseline inventory that we've developed for the city of Cedar Falls. I'll talk in a minute about the difference between government and community analyses. But this basically involves collecting a lot of data from the city, and in this case from Cedar Falls Utilities as well. If we lived in another city that had an investor-owned utility, we'd have to work with that utility for some of the energy-related data. But we're lucky, we're really fortunate here to have a municipal utility, and a fantastic one at that. That is interested in doing what's best for the community, for the citizens of Cedar Falls. So after we've done the baseline inventory, then we look at what happens over time, given if we don't make any changes, if we don't implement any strategies to reduce emissions at the local level, but the community continues to grow at its current population growth rate, and we also continue to experience decarbonization in the electricity grid. We do put in those factors because we know those things are happening. They're just already occurring. But with only those two factors applied, what will emissions look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if we don't apply any other reduction strategies? And then the work can begin of planning. So after we've got the baseline established, we know business as usual, what that would create out into the future, we can start to analyze, well, what things could the local government do? Could some policies be changed? Could some programs be implemented that will reduce emissions? So first step, we'd like to set a goal, going out into the future. What is the community interested in? Is it reducing emissions by a certain percentage out into the future at a certain date? It'd be great for a city to adopt a goal so that you can work towards that. These are some examples. U.S. commitments at the national scale in the Paris Climate Accord were 26 to 28% below 2005 levels out in the year 2025, and then a subsequent goal beyond that of reducing down to 80% below 2005 levels in the year 2050. Whatever goal the city is interested in pursuing could set for itself, but that gives us something to shoot for. And then look at those strategies that could be implemented and modeled for their greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential, and could be put together into a non-binding plan. I want to emphasize that. We're not talking about anything that's binding, we're just talking about a guide that can support decision-making and goal setting that you'll do on an annual basis, and the budgeting that you need to do for coming years. You know, this will just support the decisions that you need to make. And then long-term, we need to know whether we're making progress. So you've got a baseline, you've got a plan for some reductions, got a goal out in the future. You can then come back and do subsequent inventories to measure your emissions using that same protocol that we did for the baseline inventory, and see whether those strategies that you put into a plan are making a difference. And if they're not, the plan could be tweaked. You know, it's a living document. It could be changed in ways to make it more meaningful and impactful. If we're making good progress, then we've got something to celebrate. So that's kind of the whole process, all in a nutshell there. Just wanted to mention quickly, there are two different types of, or scales of analysis that can be done. We shared the report that the student did a couple of years ago with you so that you can look at the whole thing. It included both of these inventories, so I wanted to make sure that I explained that greenhouse gas emissions inventories can be done across an entire community, and that would include an analysis of residential, commercial, industrial energy use, transportation, which is essentially vehicle miles traveled across a community in any given year, water and wastewater treatment, distribution, all of that process, and then solid waste generation and disposal, and any characteristics of the landfill where that solid waste winds up. That's what data goes into a community-wide inventory. And that's actually what we're going to focus on in the numbers that I show you later. But the report that I gave you also included an analysis of the local government operations itself. So the emissions that are associated with all of the things that are listed under that government operations inventory bullet that I put there, those are included in the report that you have as well. Those could be used for analyzing the operations of the local government itself for any kind of reductions you might like to pursue in your own operations. So, it's terribly small. Sorry about that. These are the results of the community-wide emissions inventory for the year 2016. The student I had working on this was doing this work in 2017. The latest data we had available at that time was 2016. So all of the raw data, the type of data is listed in the first column. Second column, there we go, that's a little bit better. Second column is the raw data itself for the year 2017, and that data came again from folks in the city, staff members that were very helpful in helping us gather that data, and CFU folks that worked with us as well. So we've got all the data points, and then you have to turn raw data, whether it's kilowatt hours of electricity or million BTUs of natural gas, or vehicle miles traveled in transportation and so forth, have to turn that into emissions by multiplying by a factor. So that's the third column there, and then total emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent those are the numbers in the last column there. It totals up to around 626,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in that year 2016. So I just want to point out that the unit there, this may be getting into the weeds a little bit, but the unit is carbon dioxide equivalent. That's the standard way of reporting greenhouse gas emissions, because we have several different greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is one, it's the most common and most prevalent, but there are other gases that have to be converted into their equivalent in carbon dioxide. So methane, for instance, is about 28 times more powerful than carbon dioxide for its greenhouse gas potential. in trapping heat. So whatever methane number we have to multiply that times 28 and add that to the carbon dioxide number. And that's, we come up with a total carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the standard unit for reporting emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So 626 more or less. Then the second step we talked about was the forecast. Yeah, that one looks good. The forecast, the business as usual forecast. So if we only apply changes in population, so growth rate in our population, based on census data from recent years, and then also some a factor associated with decarbonization of the electricity grid. So I want to make it clear that those are the two factors that have been applied here, but no other factors that local government is looking at for reductions. The reason we include decarbonization of the electricity grid is because that's happening and it's important. It's and it's positive. It's actually, well, it's negative, which is positive, which is a good thing. So we know that wind energy is spreading across the state, and that helps all of us because we belong to a big electron pool in the Midwest, across the country, where generation of electricity gets kind of dumped into the pool, and then we all sort of use out of it. So we all benefit from this renewable energy generation that we're seeing, and what you see here in residential energy, commercial energy, industrial energy, and down in the use of energy associated with water and wastewater treatment are reductions. So that is attributable to the greening, if you want to call it that, of the electricity grid primarily. Natural gas is also a figure in that, but natural gas doesn't become more or less carbon intensive. It's flat. Electricity has become less carbon intensive, and that decarbonization of the grid has outpaced the population increase in Cedar Falls. So that's why you see negative numbers in those columns out into the future. Transportation and solid waste, though, are not dependent on electricity. So the only factor that's making any changes there in those sectors is population growth. So if we don't do anything to reduce vehicle miles traveled in our community, and we just continue to grow, then what we would expect is an increase of up to close to 27% in emissions associated with transportation out in the year 2030. So, in a 14-year time span. Solid waste is the same thing. More people are going to generate more solid waste. So, and then the primary emissions associated with solid waste, by the way, are landfill emissions. So the more we put into the landfill, the more methane is generated in the landfill. So the more emissions we will see from our landfill. Again, a very potent greenhouse gas. So, so that's what's expected overall. You total that together, we're looking at a almost 2.5% increase just in business as usual without applying any reductions. That may seem like it's not too bad, but recall, the goal here is to reduce emissions, not to go up, but reduce them down to some measurable goal out in the future. So I just I put in a few images here just to kind of give you an idea of what types of things we might be talking about when we talk about strategies that could go into a climate action plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The image on the left is our downtown Cedar Falls here, and it's very traditional design. And it compared to some patterns of growth that we see in other places, this is a very compact design. There's a mix of uses, so vehicles aren't as necessary. Wastewater that's used in this area flows by gravity right now to the wastewater treatment plant. It doesn't have to be pumped. This is a low energy intensive form of development. So That's one thing we just need to think about as we plan our communities for the future is how do we actually develop the community in ways that are going to either require more energy use or less, you know. So this isn't just about switching to renewable energy and continuing the same patterns necessarily. It's about thinking about our patterns and way of life and trying to build a new future that is less energy intensive. So top right is something you'll all recognize. That's the redevelopment of University Avenue. That was, from a climate action standpoint, was a wonderful project. I know it was pretty controversial for you guys, but you're to be applauded in this way for, you know, for doing this. Changing signalized intersections to roundabouts is less energy intensive mode of travel because there's less idling. The intersections are not signalized themselves, requiring less energy, less maintenance required in the future. You know all of this stuff because you lived it. There also, this kind of incorporates the complete streets philosophy that you have because there's more walkability and bikeability in that corridor now than there used to be. So that's an improvement in terms of you know, reducing vehicle miles traveled, and there's better access for public transportation. You have pullouts for buses that have been incorporated there. Now we got to continue to work on the transportation system itself, but we've built the infrastructure to accommodate it, which is a good thing. And then bottom right is the landfill. So that's a picture of the Blackhawk County landfill. And I kind of mentioned the things that could be done from a landfill perspective earlier. One of the things I didn't mention, we have no methane capture system on our landfill currently. And I know that you don't control the landfill directly. It's controlled by the Blackhawk Solid Waste Management Authority, but you have a seat at that table. That's a multi-jurisdictional authority that oversees the landfill. So you have some influence over what's done there. And no methane capture means that they're just vents that go straight into the atmosphere. So methane is completely untreated and goes into the atmosphere. Installing a methane capture system to flare that methane, to convert it from methane into carbon dioxide is one huge step that reduces those emissions by 28 times their potency. But, you know, another thing that could be done to take it even a step further is to capture that methane and use it to generate electricity that could be used on site in the station there, the way station or something. So we'd actually be reducing the amount of electricity purchased to operate that site. So there are a lot of things that could be done. I don't want to check my time, sorry. Don't want to take too much time. I want to leave some time for questions, but I just want to go through something I don't have a slide for here really quickly. So in the world of climate action planning, I guess we have two different you know, frames, I guess, to look at or ways to address climate change. One is I guess you could call hazard mitigation or climate adaptation, or making a community more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And that's, you know, on the end, that's dealing with the end, you know, the results of what's going to happen to us. And you're to be applauded for that. We are to be. Our community is to be. Because we've taken very proactive steps to make the community resilient to the changes that we know are happening and are going to continue to happen. Floodplain ordinance was a really big one that some of you fought for after the 2008 floods. And you're to be commended for that. CFU is another thing. CFU has buried most of their power lines and fiber optic lines to, you know, reduce outages and save money to in dealing with those things. That was another very proactive thing. And just recently, you've raised the levee by a couple of feet. So another, you know, proactive step, and you'd be applauded for all of those things. That levee now is more resilient to potential flooding for downtown Cedar Falls. So that's the kind of hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, resilience piece. Back to what we're talking about doing, we're talking about the front end of this thing and dealing with the causes of this problem to begin with. And it's something, the city of Cedar Falls may globally only have a small piece of, but the way we see it is that this is everybody's problem, and it's everybody's thing that we've got to deal with. And if every community dealt with it proactively and started taking measures to reduce emissions, we know that 70% of greenhouse gas emissions are generated in cities. So we can have that sort of impact if we set some measurable goals and start working on this thing. So some of the things you've already done and are doing could be considered reduction strategies, and you're to be applauded for those too. I'd say on the CFU side of things, we've had a great energy efficiency program for years. Pete Olson and his team, I think Pete's he's going to be retiring, I think, soon, but he's worked for years at this, at offering programs for customers, CFU customers, that have essentially resulted in no, significant increases in electricity consumption, electricity and natural gas, while the community has grown. That's a big deal, so to be applauded for that. They have shifted the electricity generation portfolio that CFU owns in the renewable direction. So that's wonderful. We've got more room to go there, but that's a step in the right direction. Back to you, back to the city. We talked about complete streets, incorporating more infrastructure for biking and walking. That's important. You've done it in a number of cases. We need to continue to do that, make our streets more bike and pedestrian friendly. We talked about University Avenue, and then to the downtown visioning process that you're doing right now. That's a very proactive step, and it gives us things to think about and possibilities that we can consider for a new pattern of development for our community. So you're to be applauded for doing that process. As I see it, there are still opportunities, and that's what this type of program can assist with, is the ask, I guess we'd say, and I'd go to my last slide, would be to convene a task force. I think that's what we need. This is not just some outside folks coming and telling you what you need, telling the city. Although I am a community member, I think that we need a group of stakeholders from the community to look at possibilities, to look at things, look at this baseline emissions inventory, and think about some new possibilities for things that could be implemented. And then our role at the CEEE is to take those ideas that a stakeholder group comes up with and to analyze those for their greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential. So using the ClearPath software and the ICLEI membership that we have, we can do some modeling to see, okay, if you change this policy in the city, or if you implement this program, what can we model that will do to greenhouse gas emissions over time, over the next 10, 20, 30 years? And then you can come back and consider those things. You can look at them and make your own decisions about whether or not you'd like to incorporate those into your goal setting and your budgeting for the coming years. So I think that's the type of process that we would advocate for. We think that is healthy and good for a sustainable future in the city of Cedar Falls and in any other city that wants to undertake a process like this. Back to the beginning slides, this is kind of about doing what's right for future generations. We owe it to them, I believe, to be proactive about dealing with this issue right now and doing all that we could to make a better future. So I think that's all I got right now, and I don't know if you want to ask questions or...
I'll certainly open it up, Eric, for questions from council.
I'm sorry, that's your job.
No, that's okay, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. I know you have a time constraint, but I'll certainly open it up for council to ask Eric questions and then see where it goes from there. So, sure. Council members?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Green?
Eric, I was just curious, if in your research you've encountered other cities that are about our size that you would consider a model, especially in the Midwest?
Yeah, there are. In fact, so in the state of Iowa, there hasn't been a lot of this work done. The two cities that have done climate action plans and that have adopted them are Iowa City and then Dubuque. Iowa City's is very new. They just adopted it last year. So they had a year-long process to develop that. Dubuque has had theirs for a number of years. 2013 was when they worked on theirs and adopted theirs. So there's not a lot of examples in Iowa right now. That was in fact kind of why we wanted to start this program at UNI, was to follow that process and help other cities do this. But there are cities in the Midwest that have done it for sure. Madison has a good plan. It's bigger than us, but if we look at Metro, Cedar Falls, Waterloo, it's sort of on the same scale. There's a suburb of, if you want to call it that, of Madison that's done this. There are cities in Ohio and Illinois as well. So there are good examples all over, and we've done our best to review those plans. And in fact, one of the first things I had a student do was kind of do a review of many different plans across the Midwest, so similar climate zone, and come up with a list, kind of a laundry list of the types of strategies that are common in all of these plans, so that we have something to look at for cities that are interested in considering this. So I'm happy to share that as well, if that answers it. Thanks.
Anything else from council?
The study you did 2 years ago, is that data still viable? I mean, is that where we can start with anything that we do?
Sure.
You wouldn't have to go back and
Not as a baseline. The baseline, you could actually establish a much earlier baseline. Like the standard for the Paris Climate Accord was 2005 was the baseline year. So the goals that were set out into the future were reductions below the level in 2005. So the baseline could be any year. You just need a starting line. I will say that one thing I want to make clear is that the data that we put into the baseline inventory that we did, if the city chooses to move forward with this and has any interest in diving deeper into those numbers and making sure that they really accurately represent, this was a student project, and I think it's a good one. I think the results are good. But if there's anything the city is interested in doing to fine-tune that baseline inventory so that when we do future ones down the road, we're really capturing any changes that might occur in a plan that you might implement, we're up for doing that. We want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the baseline as much as possible. So along those lines, I've presented this to Cedar Falls Utilities, to their staff, and to the Board of Trustees. And then because a lot of the data came from CFU, particularly with regard to electricity generation and the carbon emissions factors that go into that. We've had some subsequent conversations after I presented to them about making sure that that emissions factor is exactly right, so that when we measure again down the road, then any changes that they might implement will really show up well. That we've got a really solid and accurate baseline there. So I just want to know that this is a team thing. This isn't, something that I'm doing.
Do you have the same kind of discussion with the utility board about putting a long-range plan together?
They're interested in that, and in fact, they've put together kind of a several-month process of examining their own emissions profile, if you want to call it that. So they're at work doing that, and what I would say how that kind of meshes with and fits with this overall thing is the utilities portfolio of electricity generation, how much natural gas they sell, how much water they sell to the community. Those are important things that they can take action on to kind of shift, but it really is a program, and it's a component. All of that stuff they do is a component of the bigger picture, but this really is designed for a city government, and a lot of the components that would go into a climate action plan are about long-term planning and how the community develops. Remember that our sectors that will be growing the most are transportation and solid waste. So those have very little to do with the utilities. We need to be thinking about what do we do, how do we develop our community in ways that require less vehicle travel. If you want to just make it as simple as we can, do we put more commercial developments near and integrate it in with residential development. All of those things that go along with smart growth, the smart growth principles, form-based code, which you're kind of looking at right now anyway and considering, but adding to those things, like what is the actual greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential? That's the value that our program can add to those things.
Great. Anything further from council? Mr. Wieland?
I'm going to get a little bit off subject for just a second.
Okay.
Nuclear energy is a very clean producer of energy, and it's not been used very much in our country. It has been overseas in France, Germany, and those countries, and that has to be reducing greenhouse gases in those countries. Is there any thought of re-energizing nuclear energy here? I know I've talked to CFU about it.
Yeah.
Oh, small nuclear plant.
And that was going to be my response. I was going to push it to them because, that's a part of their electricity generation portfolio. So it's a decision that CFU and its, Board of Trustees have to make. You're right, it's zero emissions. It has other negative environmental impacts that need to be considered as well. So from an emissions standpoint, it helps, but there are other environmental factors that have to be considered, and those are the kinds of decisions that that CFU trustees have to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anything further from council? And I'm not hearing any formal action as far as bringing forth a task force. I did have one quick question for you. In terms of bringing a task force together, all the factors that you had mentioned, Eric, do you see a time frame whereby this task force would have something of substance? You mentioned maybe for goal setting, that's 4 months away.
Yeah.
Task force getting just joined up initially and having some meetings might take that long, or at least a number of weeks. I guess you or your team thought through any sort of time frame for some recommendations from a task force that get developed.
We're ready to go. We could, as quickly as a group could be convened, we'd be happy to start meeting, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we could convene a group and come up with some recommendations that could be analyzed by goal setting.
Okay.
We're anxious to do this work, so yeah.
Mr. Blanford, did you have something?
Mr. Mayor, are you looking for a recommendation now, or do you want that at council to follow?
I think for a committee, it would be fine to propose that, to have somehow a task force get developed and get established. That would be the formal way for our committee meetings to have staff move forward for the resources, for time and energy and effort for a task force.
I would make that recommendation.
I would second it.
Motion second here. Any further discussion from council?
I guess I'd be curious about the makeup of a committee like that. Who all should participate? What kind of participation do we have? And I like the idea of trying to meet prior to come up with some recommendations, if not a final set of recommendations, prior to goal setting, so that if it's viable, we can set some specific goals to work towards. We're pretty good at working towards identified goals. So, but I guess I'm curious about who we might want to have on a committee like that.
Sure. Certainly open for discussion when the time comes to do such. It's on the table, and it's been seconded in motion. I'd be happy to entertain folks who want to come from the audience, and I'll try to hold you to 5 minutes. It can be shorter than that, that'd be great, but clearly this is where policy might begin. So happy to entertain folks to come up to the microphone and give their input.
I'll sit.
That's fine, Eric, yeah. Be ready for questions, maybe. Anyone interested? Yes, please, come on up. Just your name and address, please. The microphone.
Carol Yates, 519 Chateau Court, Cedar Falls. Thank you for listening so very, very carefully. I really appreciate it. We are in an emergency time, and it's imperative that Cedar Falls join other communities and states across the country and across the world to have our climate be regulated somewhat. I want to tell you that if you do your task force, you are building on solid ground that this council actions you previously took. In 2009, former Mayor John Cruz appointed a task force, maybe similar to what you're thinking about now, to look at, their directive was to develop strategies to significantly reduce Cedar Falls' reliance on fossil sources of energy and increase our community's use of renewable energy sources. There were people on it from the City Council, from Cedar Falls Utilities, from business, from construction, Community Main Street, congregations, UNI, and an architect was also on that task force. We came up with a number of suggestions. I don't believe we ever made a formal presentation to a council committee or the council, but my email is wonderful in some ways because I have a bunch of documents left over from what we came up with and would be happy to share those if that would be of any help. I want to do whatever I can to help move this forward as soon as possible, given that I believe that we are in an emergency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone further? Very good. It's a motion and second to move to a task force. Is any further questions or comments from council? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you again, Eric. Appreciate all the hard work and presentation there. Moving on to the next report is cash management from Lisa Roding, our controller and city treasurer. You can just wait, Lisa, let him go.
I think we should be okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. The Finance and Business Operations had in your packet the 2020 Cash Management Report. And this is our 31st year in preparing this report and reviewing the cash management program. We do this annually to make sure that we have cash reserves on hand to meet our operating cost requirements. As you know, or you may not know, our largest property taxes are received in October and April of each year. And these cash reserves are necessary to have the cash flow until we receive those major property tax payments each year. This periodic review of the cash management program provides a snapshot of the financial status of these 9 specific funds. Cash reserves are determined by an individual fund and they're not lumped together. Having set policies in place ensure financial stability, and performing this financial analysis each year can provide valuable information with regards to current and future city finances. The investments this past year, the rates have steadily increased over the past 3 years, and our average rate of return is 2.77% on our investments, and this is up from 1.88 in fiscal year 18. We continue to review the city investment policy, making sure we preserve and keep the principal balances in safekeeping, that we obtain reasonable rate of return on our investments, and that we do maintain enough liquid balance to cover our operating costs. In fiscal year 2020, we are set to sell general obligation debt to fund various capital improvements plans that will be set forth. And we will issue this new debt in accordance to not exceed the replacement debt level that we have set, and that is $3 to $4 million each year, or every other year. The city does project its equipment replacement and maintenance program, and that is actually done through the budget process, but we have included in the report the actual vehicle replacements for fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020. Again, the goal of the cash management program is to provide valuable information for our past, present, and future finances with regards to the investments, the cash reserves, the long-term borrowing, and the vehicle maintenance program. I would like to specifically thank Kathy Niebergall for helping prepare this report, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lisa. Anything for council?
Thank you, Lisa, for all the work you and your team do. I know it's a lot of time, but we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep, good team. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, council, is a motion to allow bills and payroll.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. This concludes this evening's Committee of the Whole meeting. We'll join the council at the top of the hour for the regular city council meeting. Thank you.